scenario. And the scenarios for each of them, you notice right away in every scenario, A, some number A, is bigger than some number B. So when we have that, what does that mean for addition, subtraction, and multiplication, right? And in each of them, there's this other number C that's coming up. Now C can equal anything, but notice that in each case, we're either adding C to both A and B, subtracting C, or multiplying C. So we're looking at value for addition, subtraction, and multiplication. And in here, we're going to compare, which side's larger. And is it always straightforward? Well, this is the fun of it, because we have to play with these numbers and see what happens. Now, a good way to play and test is to compare at least 3 cases, which is a positive case, right? Look at the numbers when they're positive, and look at when they're negative or have some negative amount. Sorry about this. Some negative amount in some way. Mix the numbers up. Maybe they're both negative, one of them's negative, and always look at what happens when we have 0. So you want to really test it out. Try across these 3 groups. It's not a guarantee, but it might really give us a good sense of our intuition. And the first scenario, actually, I think this is quite interesting, because I feel like we don't even need to test these 3 out. Maybe we will, but the idea is that if A is bigger than B, and we add to both A and B the same amount, what's going to happen? Well, this is always going to be bigger. Imagine it, right? You have $100. Try a positive case, and we add some amount. Maybe it's $10. I have $3, and I add $10, the same amount. Who's going to have more? Well, you are, because you started with more. Even if C is 0, you'll still end up with more because you had 100. If C was negative, well, then what would happen? Well, you still have more because we're losing the same amount. So it doesn't matter how we spin this, you'll always end up with more if you started with more and you're adding. Subtraction, the same thing happens. Now, well, if I take $10 away and I start with 3, well, now I have negative $7 and you have 90, so you have more. If I take away a negative amount from each of us, that's like adding, right? Taking negative 10 away, well, you now have 110. I have 13. You still have more. And if C was 0, nothing would change. The interesting case I have, I think, is right here. What happens if A is bigger than B, then A times C? How does it compare with B times C? Well, let's say A is 5 and B is 4. Well, what happens when C is 0? Well, I'll write down here, 5 times, oops, let me write it where I wrote the word 0. So test the 0 case. Well, we don't know what C is, but we'll have it equal 0. Then we have 5 times 0 and 4 times 0. Well, in both cases there's 0, so when C equals 0, it doesn't matter what A and B are, they're going to be equal. You could keep testing it. If I had negative 6 for A and negative 10 for B, right, because B is smaller, still, when we multiply everything by 0, we still get 0. So they're equal. So if C is 0, then they're equal. You could write it nice and fancy like this. If C equals 0, then A times C equals B times C. What about a negative case? Well, let's try 5 times negative 1. Keep it simple. How does that compare with 4 times negative 1? Well, 5 times negative 1 is negative 5. 4 times 1 is negative 4. And negative 5 is smaller. It's more negative than negative 4. So when that happens, this side's larger. And that'll work for any combination of A and B. You can play around with it, test it. So if C is negative, like a negative number, we chose negative 1, it's less than 0, then, right, A times C is going to be less than B times C. And that's interesting to me. That this problem, if I was rushing, I'm sure I'd miss that. In the positive case, if we have 5 times 1, right, now C is 1, and A is 5, how does that compare with 4 times 1? Well, in that case, 5 times 1 is larger than 4 times 1. So if C is bigger than 0, then, and this is the most intuitive one, A times C is bigger than B times C. So, and we're playing around, and you can keep going. If you didn't feel confident in these answers, start changing the A and the B values. Notice I chose 2 positive values for A and B. If we didn't feel confident that these work for all cases, which I think they do, you can mess around with A and B. Make A a negative number, and then make both a and b negative numbers. Make just b negative. See what happens and how it changes the scenario. Alright, hope that helped.